Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. If you're new here, my name is Christina. If you're not new here, hi, welcome back. It's great to see you. This is something a little bit different than I normally do. I'm not going to do a reading today, but I was receiving like a download, let's call it, about the healing journey and what it's sort of like to heal trauma. So just as a content warning, I will be talking about trauma and healing and all of that. So just beware if that's not where you're at, if that's not the energy that you're in right now, maybe save this one for another time. So the message that I was receiving about healing is through this metaphor of like the garbage patch in the ocean, where it's kind of like, so I'm using our oceans as sort of like your moon energy of like how you process emotions or your emotional state in general. It also includes things like your subconscious, your memories, your dreams, all of that sort of watery moon energy. And I think it's so important to work with this energy about like your emotional state, making sure that you're sort of in an energy of having peaceful waters as much as possible, and also being conscious of the quote-unquote garbage that can collect in this emotional space, because so let's just say I think that everybody, when we're first born onto this earth, we all have sort of clean water, right? Let's just call it that. A blank slate, a fresh start. The water is perfectly like pure and clean. And through the process of like life and when we encounter trauma, because I feel like everybody in the world has some sort of trauma that is caused by somebody else, right? And that will vary for everybody. But over time, this trauma or garbage, let's call it, collects, right? So it creates like a garbage patch. And that becomes almost like a central wounding. And it could be multiple. It doesn't even have to be just one area of your life. Like when we're young, before we're sort of able to manage our emotions, garbage can collect in sort of like a patch. It's just called like that. And that patch can also attract more garbage, right? Because if you think about like the flow of the currents of the ocean, right? It'll just naturally bring more debris and then collect, and that's when it causes a blockage. Right? So if there's a lot of trauma that collects over time, and I feel like this is part of where the subconscious energy comes in, where it's like you subconsciously hear messages from your guardians, like your parents, the culture, whatever it is, right? Subconsciously, you collect all of this information about that could cause harm, for example. And that, if that's not dealt with in an appropriate manner, that garbage can collect and become like a bigger problem, right? I feel like everybody has had that sort of experience. And so for me personally, how this is coming through is that like before you enter into a healing journey, right? Because this is how I sort of see a spiritual awakening, right? That's why spiritual awakenings sometimes, or like, I want to say almost all the time, come with a very dark night of the soul, because that to me is like finally seeing all of the garbage that has collected in your ocean is how I define a spiritual awakening in terms of this metaphor, where it's like you can suddenly see all of this garbage or pollution that has gathered in your emotional state, right? So, but like usually the lead up into a spiritual awakening usually comes with like hardship, right? Like you see standing from the shore, right? Standing from your conscious, logical, awake, or like let's just call it logical. When you're standing on the ground, not a subconscious energy, but a conscious awareness, you can see all this garbage that's starting to come into your shore, right? That's sort of the beginnings of a spiritual awakening. And the process of healing and the dark night of the soul energy becomes when you actually go out and look for the garbage patch. Where is that garbage coming from? And I'm using this term garbage just as a metaphor of like unpleasantness, right? But is actually a very natural part of the process of being alive, right? If you think about your body naturally produces waste material. When you eat something, it comes out the other end as waste, things that you don't need. But unfortunately, how this can sort of impact negatively, right? So creating waste is unfortunately a natural part of the process. But what can happen if you're not consciously aware of what it is that you're releasing, it can actually start polluting other people's waters around you as well, right? Like, it's like you dump out something that is perhaps waste for you, like it's like something that you don't need, or something that is a natural process of like you just being a human, right? Like you jump out something and it ends up in somebody else's water perhaps. And that can start sort of like a cycle of pain and trauma, right? So if you've encountered pain of some sort, and in order to release that energy, right? Because it's like that's the process of the natural state of how energy flows. It's like it has to transform, it has to move, it has to be released in some way. That if you're not conscious of that, you can cause harm to somebody else, right? You can pollute their water because you're now producing waste or expelling waste into somebody else's domain, if that makes sense. So what is coming through to me through this download is that in the healing process, or sometimes just in like how we experience life, sometimes there are blockages, right? That are caused by trauma, it could be, or from other things, right? So it could also be a self-imposed blockage, right? They're in like subconsciously. And there are different ways in which that can come through. So sometimes also the universe will put blockages around a particular aspect of your life, for example, in order to get you to clean up the quote-unquote garbage so that it doesn't spread to other people or to the other manifestations or whatever that is, right? So it's like either the universe puts a blockage in front of you, or through your conscious sort of awareness, you can also put up a blockage temporarily so that you can take time to clean up whatever that space is. So for example, if like before you're conscious of before you become conscious of the area of blockage or leakage, let's call it a leak. I feel like somebody in my comments, I can't remember the name, I'm sorry, asked about this, about like being able to identify leaks and blockages. And I feel like this is part of the answer to that, is that let's say you're trying to move in a certain direction, but there's a blockage there for whatever reason. Either the universe puts something in your path, or it's like your movement forward is being prohibited from going in that way. That's a blockage. And it's like the universe put that there. It's almost like sectioning off a part of the ocean, right? Like if you put like a boundary over a part of the ocean that has all this like garbage in it, it interrupts the flow, the natural current and the natural flow of the ocean. So, so when you encounter a blockage, it's important to look at what could possibly be in that area that's not being looked at, where it's like there may be a leakage there. Because if you think about just like why garbage might collect in a certain place, it's like maybe there's a void, right? Some sort of like a garbage can, right? A place of disposal, let's call it, right? Like I'm going to call it a wounding, right? Let's just call it a void. There's a void there. And so it could be that if it's unhealed, right? People walking by this void or this ocean or whatever, or like this wounding, let's call it, will dump their trash into it because they think that because there's a wounding there or there's a void there, there's a trash can, I'm going to throw my trash in there. And that's when it can become a leakage, when it's like you've left some aspect of your energy open to other people's trash, if that makes sense. So other people will take advantage of that, absolutely. Perhaps unconsciously. It's not a judgment on the other people who are disposing trash. It's like, and this is how I think trauma bonds are formed. It's like if you have, especially because it has to do with your moon sign and their perhaps sun sign and rising sign, maybe, I don't know, where it's like your method of receiving, perhaps, right? Because the moon sign is also a feminine energy. So what you receive, what you accept from other people, how you accept love, and what makes you feel good and what makes you feel bad and all of that. And so through trauma bonding, what happens is that you may form an attachment with somebody who dumps trash on you in a way that you are familiar with, that feels comfortable to you, because it's like patterns of other people dumping trash on you that you have accepted throughout like your childhood or growing up or whatever, right? And so when you meet somebody where there is a trauma bond attachment, it's like they dump their trash on you in a way that is familiar to you, that feels familiar, that absolutely does not feel good, but because it's something that you're used to, that you've been conditioned to, becomes a pattern of behavior. And so sometimes there is blockages because perhaps you are engaging in an activity that reinforces a pattern of behavior where you're accepting trash from other people, because that is an established way of how you've been living your life up until a certain point, for example. Okay, and so part of the healing work now becomes putting up boundaries between people who have, people who are trying to put trash in this wound that you have. So it could be like putting up boundaries. It's like, you're not allowed to put that sort of energy in my space, right? That's what a boundary is. I'm not accepting this sort of behavior or this sort of response to my energy, to my peace, to my emotions, right? And it's like putting up a very firm boundary about that. And that's part of healing, right? So if that means temporarily blocking yourself off from people who are throwing trash at you, that's what's necessary. And then eventually, so this is where it can kind of go a couple different ways, where sometimes for wounding, it becomes an area of sensitivity where it's not sometimes, all the time, woundings become areas of sensitivity. So even though you've cleaned out all the trash, you've gotten rid of all of the negative energy that's been collecting there for some time, right? It's all clean now, but that area still holds memory, right? It holds memory and remembrance of what happened, right? Because now you're aware of it. You can see how other people have put trash into this wounding of yours. And it becomes sensitive now to that particular energy, right? It's like, it's a magnet. It becomes like a magnet where it could, if you're not aware of it, could draw that sort of pattern of behavior again to you. And I feel like how this can manifest is that if you're very sensitive, for example, it can lead to a hypersensitivity where now it's like you've blocked off everything from ever entering that space again, because it's taken so much work to actually clean it, and it's tiring, right? Like you need rest and recovery. And so there could be sort of this tendency of like not wanting anyone to come near, or isolating yourself to the point where it's like nobody gets close to this, or nobody gets close to this aspect of your energy, or whatever it is. And I saw this really poignant quote from like a therapist online somewhere, where it's like, are you actually healed, or have you just isolated yourself from ever being triggered again, right? Because it's kind of like if you're like blocking continually the aspect that caused harm in the first place, it will cause like isolation, essentially. So there's that. That's one way it can go. Another way it can go is sort of how I see the Chiron energy, right? So Chiron talks about sort of like the wounded healer, where now it's like you've established that there is this sort of receptacle here in this particular area of sensitivity or wounding, that has become sort of a natural receptacle, is kind of how it's coming through, right? Like it's a vessel, it's a place or a valley, it's something that receives. And so people who have Chiron energy that are like very like have actually worked to go into the healer aspect of it, is that now using that particular sensitivity and using it to help other people, right? So it could be like helping other people to deal with their trash in a way that doesn't harm others, right? Where it's actually helping to transmute that energy, because this is how I think about the trash or the waste and what to do with the waste products. Because like I said in the beginning, waste and the quote unquote trash, the garbage, is a natural process of how we live, right? Like we ingest food that nourishes our bodies, and then we get rid of anything that we don't need. And so what are healthy ways in which we can remove the trash and make something beautiful of it? Because that is the art of transmutation, of alchemy, right? Taking something not useful and turning it into something like taking lead and turning it into gold, making it into something beautiful through effort and all of that. And that's where art comes in. That's where expression comes in. Whatever your particular form of creation comes in is like taking something that is perhaps at first glance not useful, right? Or like something that somebody else threw away, or that somebody else is giving to you, right? Like they're dumping trash onto you, for example. I know the language is so... Anyways, they're dumping trash onto you, for example, And it's up to you on how you decide to deal with it, because isolation is not the answer. I know that for a time it is, right? In the healing journey, isolating yourself so that you can do all the cleaning work, absolutely necessary. It becomes an issue when the isolation becomes very, very, very long term, or that like there's almost like nothing. It interrupts the flow is what this is feeling like. It's interrupting the flow of creation, basically. So if you're too isolated, it interrupts the flow. But so first of all is learning how not to be triggered by the trash that people give you, and just remembering that if somebody is producing trash or dumping trash or dumping their garbage or their waste products onto you, it's because it's a natural process, right? And it's kind of up to you on how you take that and use it for something good, and transmute it within yourself. So there is a tendency to take that trash that they've given you and throw it right back at them, right? I'm guilty of this a lot. And that's also part of the healing journey. It's like recognizing when you're doing that and to stop doing that, because it perpetuates cycles of pain, right? But there is a way in which you can take the energy that you're given and transmute it and create it into something like art. Because one of my favorite artists did this interview a couple of months ago. It's Suga from BTS, and he talked about how creating art sometimes is like using a toilet, right? It's like it's getting rid of something that you don't need, that you should not be carrying within your body or your energy, right? It's like a waste product. But there is a way to make that into art, into something beautiful, into something that other people will perhaps see as an inspiration, or that will help them, or whatever. And so there is also this danger, though, or a caution about what it is that you're putting out there. So, and this is also something about just like art in general, that art is subjective, that not everybody is going to understand what you're creating and why, or why it's important to you. And just to take that with a grain of salt. So if there is negative feedback on what it is that you're doing, being honest with yourself about whether that's constructive criticism or if it is somebody else's waste product that you don't need to pay attention to, right? Or use that to further fuel your creative process. I was also getting this download about narcissism. I'm using that in quotation marks because I feel like the definition of that is so... There's so many opinions on that I feel like it's become difficult to actually appropriately define what a narcissist is. But the example that's coming through... So first of all, everybody in this world needs to go to the bathroom, right? They need to take a shit every day, usually in healthy processing of your body. And I feel like that can also be sort of a thing that is transformed into art in some way, right? Like, I'm not talking about like your literal shit, but I'm talking about like how you express, how you create, and how you transmute that energy into something that's actually useful and beneficial to you. So anyways, going back to narcissism, where I feel like there are people who, when they produce shit, right, they think it smells like roses, right? There's an Outkast song called Roses, which talks about that exactly. It's like somebody who thinks that their shit always smells like roses, That is what a narcissist is in this definition of this metaphor, where it's like, no, your shit does not smell like roses. Honestly, that's what's coming through here. It's like, so a narcissist is someone who sees shit and their own shit and calls it roses, and refuses to sort of change how it is that they're projecting their energy onto other people, right? Refusing to see how their projection of energy harms other people. That's what a narcissist is. And that it is a continued pattern of behavior that never changes. So that's the definition in this model or theory, if you want to call it that. But also recognizing that as a human being, producing shit is a natural part of the process. You are going to shit daily on just a natural way of being, right? That you can't stop yourself from doing that. It's natural. The issue is, or like the trick, I guess, or the wisdom maybe is like where it is that you are expelling your waste, and how. Because there are some things that should be done in private, right? There are some expressions of getting rid of release, right? Like releasing things that should be done behind closed doors where no one else can see or smell or whatever it is that you're producing, right? That is part of the process. And then there are other forms of expression which are artful, that have creative energies attached to it, where it's something that can be an inspiration to others and can help people and uplift people and even guide people through their own natural processes of releasing. And I think this is where the moon, sun, and rising signs come in, because those signs, right, like whatever your moon sign is, shows you how your currents flow, right? Like your emotional currents flow, what makes you feel good, what your patterns tend to be in terms of how you deal with emotions and how you process them. If they're really fast, if they're really slow, if the current is strong, that kind of thing, right? So if you think about like the natural currents of an ocean, it's always changing, and it always it also goes in cycles. It's also dependent on, there's like high tide and low tide, and all of that. So that's important in understanding how you process your emotions. The sun sign to me represents how it is that you are creating or dealing with the waste product, right? Like what it is that you do to transform that. Because through the process of like emotional release, right? Things will wash up on shore, but it's kind of like up to you with the sun sign of how it is that you take that waste product and turn it into something beautiful, or transmute or create something beautiful out of that. Which is what the sun sign dictates. And also I think the rising sign to an extent. But anyway, that's up for debate. So understanding those two aspects, your moon and your sun, and how those work together can influence how it is that you transmute that energy into something that doesn't harm other people, right? When those two things are in concert and are working together, there's so much flow energy that happens, right? And there's a lot of like positive movement. It's like things, the blockages are cleared and all of that. And that shows as well. That becomes obvious in sort of like how all the aspects in your life become harmonious and work together. And so I also want to leave this on a positive note, because I feel like I was getting this other download as well, just to continue on with this metaphor about soulmates and how it is that these people become important to you, and like solid relationships in your life. Because there are some people who, just based off like your history or like their patterns of behavior, where it just like becomes like difficult, there's conflict, perhaps because there's just not a lot of it's not like a right match between how you communicate or how you express yourself and how they communicate and how they express themselves, right? So there could become conflict in that. And it's like your trash does not match their receptacle, and their receptacle does not match your trash, if that makes sense. Or like what it is that you're putting out into the world. I'm going to stop using that word now. But it's just talking about like what it is that you want to receive from them, perhaps, is not something that they are capable of giving you, and vice versa. So that's sort of where it becomes like karmic lessons of like their output, what it is that they give does not satisfy some aspect of what it is that you wish to receive, and vice versa. And there's also people who, and I feel like this is like the people who are like natural healers, people who are like light workers, if you want to use that term, or people who are just like kind and benevolent energies, where they go around sort of cleaning up other people's trash to help, right? Just to help. It's like, oh, I see that there's something here that needs perhaps cleaning up. Let me lend you a hand and help you clean that up, right? And sometimes there are people who do that without even like consciously alerting you to the fact that they're doing that, right? There are people who quietly, very subtly go along and just pick up other people's trash. And those are people who you want to keep around. If you're very conscious of energy and energy work, you'll know who these people are in your life, that there are people who will notice when you are struggling, or notice when you're trying to clean something up in your energy or in your emotions, and they'll stand there and support you, and they'll help you to clean it. I got emotional for a second. Sorry, let me just collect myself. So, as I was saying, there are some people who go around and actively help you to clean up the wounds, right? So sometimes that's in the form of friendships. Sometimes that's in the form of therapists or family members or chosen family members. The ones who will recognize when you're in sort of a garbage patch cleaning mode and will help to dig out the trash, right? They'll get rid of it with you. They'll deal with it with you. Therapists are professional garbage patch cleaners, right? They help you to deal with that emotional pain. There are some people who these are the true soulmates, right? The ones that you want to keep around and treasure and protect, where will recognize when you are going through an emotional patch, right? Cleaning up some garbage that was left over or whatever. And not only will they help you get rid of the garbage, right? Encourage you, say kind words, like provide emotional support in whatever form that is. They will also stand guard and protect you from all of the garbage energy that's being thrown your way while you heal, right? So it's not at all saying that they are healing for you, because that's where codependency comes from, right? It's like if you need somebody to always protect you from all of that energy, right? Like something that you should be able to do on your own, like manage your emotions on your own. That's just a natural part of healing, right? So you don't want to become codependent where you're needing somebody else to manage your emotions for you on a permanent basis, right? Like on a pattern behavior kind of energy, right? That's where it becomes codependency. But if there are people who will stand guard and quote unquote protect you from the garbage while you are healing that aspect, because when a wound happens, it becomes like if you think about like a physical wound, it becomes an open sore where it can become infected and all that. So you need to close it, right? There needs to be a patch that's put over the wounding so that like people don't continue to dump their trash onto you, right? You have to almost like get rid of the garbage can, get rid of the void, get rid of the open sore to prevent other people from exploiting that wound, if that makes sense. So you have to seal it off, and that takes work. That's where it becomes tricky, and the way in which you do that is going to be different for each person depending on how you create, because I feel like that happens through expression of some sort, of art, of creation. So it's not just talking about like art in terms of like visual art or anything that you are creating with your hands or with your mind or with your voice or with your body in some way. That is an act of transmutation. And that's how you seal the wounding off. And an important sort of test, so to speak, of healing is when somebody tries to now throw trash in your direction, right? Some sort of unhealed or and maybe not unhealed, an expression of pain that is a natural thing for them to express, but is done in a way that's not conscious, right? They're just expelling waste in whatever way feels the most instinctive to them. And if that's thrown in your direction, a true test of healing is whether or not that triggers you, whether or not that puts you in a negative emotional state or not. And it's not to say that it's like people who are healed never get triggered. No, that's not it. Part of the healing process is triggering, where it's like identifying where the wounding is or what causes pain, and then actively working through that so that your waters are clean again, so that they're calm, they're peaceful. Whatever garbage that has been left over is cleaned up or picked up immediately, right? So that it doesn't linger and it doesn't collect more garbage, if that makes sense. So that is usually the sign of being healed, is when you recognize a trigger, perhaps causes a bit of discomfort at first, but you're able to work through it in a way that it doesn't collect past a certain point, right? It doesn't continue to collect more and more and more and more and more garbage, if that makes sense. And that's and evidence of that is your flow state of being able to move past things and let them go and let the energy just flow in a way that feels good to you. And the product of what it is that you're creating also feels good to you. It doesn't feel like discard or waste, or like you can be honest about whether or not this is actually something that can be put out into the world or should be kept behind closed doors, for example. So that was the download that was coming in. I feel like I'm going to end it there, just also with like a big thank you to those people who help clean other people's garbage when it's not your responsibility, just because you care Thank you so much. It's really appreciated. Whether or not you did it for me or if you're doing it for somebody else, if you're sort of quietly behind the scenes helping other people to clean up garbage, thank you. I see you, I appreciate you, and it means a lot. So I'm gonna end the message there. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment down below. It helps so much. Thank you for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.